Welcome, everyone. Thank you for joining us today for this insightful session. I'm Laurie Klausner, the Global Head of Marketing at Quantiphi. I am joined by Oded Netzer, author of the brand new book titled Decisions Over Decimals, and one of Quantiphi's amazing co-founders, Asif Hasan. Today, we will discuss a rather mystical anomaly faced by most modern leaders. Why data insights don't necessarily result in smart decisions. If data is the driver of the information age, why do leaders fail to leverage it? And ultimately, how can leaders bridge the gap between information and tuition? Let's unravel this mystery with Oded and Asif with a few questions. Let's get started with you and jump right into what led you and your two co-authors to write this book.
Thank you, Laurie. Yes, I wrote this book together with Chris Frank from American Express and Paul Mignon from Google. And what led us to write this book is exactly what you mentioned, observation that we had, which is exactly what you mentioned, Laurie. Though we have much more data than we ever had, it still doesn't seem like decisions are being made in a better way than they've been made before. It still seems like we're spinning. We're not getting there to the decision. And through observations in companies like Deloitte and IBM and Microsoft, American Express, Amazon, and through education, meaning teaching at this point thousands of executives and executives to be, we were trying to look at this issue and trying to understand why. Why is that the case? That we have much more data and decisions don't become better. And there are two myths that we have identified with this observation, again, both in the front lines of business as well as in academia and teaching executives. One is that there is this belief, erroneous belief, that you need to be top of your class in math in order to be able to make decisions with data. That the right way to make decisions with data, or those who should approach it, are those who are Excel mavens, or those who are really know Python and statistics. This is a myth. Yes, there are skills needed. There are skills needed in order to make decisions with data, but being top of your class in math is not one of them. The skills that we discuss in the book, in Decisions Over Decimals, are skills that we call quantitative intuition, the combination of some quantitative skills, again, not necessarily math, but ability to look at data together with a human judgment. The second myth that we have observed is what we call the certainty myth. There was this hope that after, looking for having so much data and having accessibility to so much data, we'll reach the nirvana of certain decisions, the perfect decisions. We will not have any more uncertainty in the decisions we make. And this is, of course, a myth as well. We all know that every single decision we make is still uncertain. We have more data than we had before, and uncertainty is maybe reduced, but we are not getting to this certainty myth. At the extreme, one could imagine that some decisions will be fully automated. Think about things like online advertising. Some of these decisions have indeed been fully automated, but for most of the decisions that we make as leaders, there is still intuition and judgment that we need to pour into that decision. And it's a different type of intuition. It's maybe different from the problem we were trying to solve with bringing data, to remove all of these biases that gut intuition bring with it. Now we have data, but we need intuition in order to think about things like focusing our attention on what are we going to analyze, what data are we going to look at, focusing our attention on what surprised me in the result that you just showed me. That's intuition, comparing the data with my business acumen and judgment. And finally, how do I bring it all together? The synthesis, which by definition means data or information together with judgment.
Asif, let's turn to you. How is what Oded just explained relevant for decision makers, and how does it appeal to an organization like ours here at Quantiphi?
So my interest in quantitative intuition actually dates back over 5 years, September 12th of 2017 to be exact. And this was the date when Paul Mignon, one of the co-authors of this wonderful book, invited me to give a guest lecture at Columbia, where he, Oded, and Chris Frank were teaching this quantitative intuition class. And the title of my talk was Synthetic Unicorns and Quantitative Intuition. And back then, as you may recall, data scientists were thought to be these magical, mythical creatures that can code on command line, wrangle massive amounts of data, know the right type of applied math and stats to apply to a problem, and also have deep business acumen and expertise to facilitate their executives to make profoundly insightful decisions for their business. And it's quite obvious that the unicorn model doesn't scale very well. So one of the ideas on which Quantiphi was founded back in 2013 was that if we can bring together data engineers, machine learning engineers, subject matter experts with deep business acumen, and create a connective tissue between them through an experienced solution architect, that this model will scale very well. And today we are close to 3,800 people, so that turned out to be true. And the more I looked at the techniques that were being taught under the whole quantitative intuition body of knowledge, the more I was convinced that we were viewing the world with a very, very similar lens. So the level of alignment between quantitative intuition and Quantify's approach to data science and decision making have a lot in common. And the book Decision Over Decimals has now codified this approach extremely rigorously in a repeatable and scalable way. So that's why it appeals to us so much.
Perfect. Oded, can we dive just a little bit deeper into the intuition side?
One of the questions we are sometimes being asked is, we all know we can teach the quant part, meaning we've been learning the quant part all the way from kindergarten in math and later in high school and college. But can you really teach intuition? Isn't by definition intuition something you either have or you don't? It's kind of a primal type of behavior. And in the theory of learning, they talk about two dimensions, the dimensions of consciousness and competence. At the lowest level of learning, we are so clueless that we don't even know we don't know. We are unconsciously incompetent. And then, we pick up this book called Decisions Over Decimals, and we hear a term called quantitative intuition. I still don't know what it is, but at least I've learned something that I didn't know. There is something called quantitative intuition. I'm becoming now consciously incompetent. I know something that I didn't know. And I open the book, hopefully I read a little bit, a couple of chapters, as Asif recently done over flight, and Asif and you have known this stuff for a long while, and suddenly you realize you become consciously competent, meaning you know what you didn't know, and you even understand. You've got a few tools. The book gives you quite a few tools of how do I become more of a quantitative intuition leader. But it's still very hard. Think about the first few days of driving or a toddler just starting to walk. All of our attention go into that. It's very hard to do. As we keep doing things over and over and over again, we are getting into the nirvana of learning, into intuition, into something becomes a habit or second nature. And this is being unconsciously competent. We do something almost without thinking. Intuition, that's how we can learn intuition, by reapplying these tools that we provide in the book. Many of the tools, like something we called I Wish I Knew, iWeek, we've seen both ourselves applying this both in companies and with executives, as well as in companies that we worked with. It becomes more of an intuitive muscle, right, to be used. The other point around the intuition is that the key with intuition is we all have intuition. We all have business acumen that we have accumulated either over the years or simply by looking at numbers and information. And the key of behind quantitative intuition is to contrast that gut or intuition or business acumen with the results, with the numbers that we see in front of us, and specifically look for the contrasts. Look for places where the data does not agree necessarily with your intuition. And in statistics, they tend to call these outliers. Sometimes the whole story is right there in the outliers, in the differences between what you expected and what you found. That's what you expected is truly your intuition. Jeff Bezos tend to say that if you have an anecdote that contradicts the data that you see, in most cases the anecdote is right. And so that's really the meaning of contrasting your intuition with the data. We call this the simple question of ask yourself what surprised you.
The quant side, it's easy to learn, or it's teachable per se, and that the unconsciously competent competency is there for each of us, but how do you come at that from the data side of things? What's your view on that?
Yeah, so I think the way overall we as an organization look at this decision making is it's about connecting the dots to create a big picture. So what's happened in the past decade and a half on the data side is that a lot of online and even offline interactions that we have with the world around us, all of this is persisted very, very inexpensively using data lakes and data mesh architectures quite inexpensively at the lowest level of grain, so at the ground truth level. So in a sense, the size of the dots is becoming smaller and smaller, and the volume of dots has exploded by a few orders of magnitude. So the businesses now have the opportunity to create this big picture using very, very small dots in very high definition. So the role of intuition, I mean, that's the role of data. The role of intuition now is about not just applying the acumen to ask the right questions, define the right problems, looking at the data in the right way, but also the intuition behind designing the algorithms to determine which dots are relevant and which ones are not, and then how to connect them to create this big picture. So that's basically our view on the data side.
Oded, so practically, how do you get to the right decisions, especially thinking about what businesses are facing today around so many uncertainties?
Yeah, I mean, the key to that, the key that we believe is the key to get into the right decisions goes through a sequence of questions. And in fact, the first question is making sure that you understand what is the journey you're about to start. There is this tendency, this urge, particularly because we have so much data and we have the skills. We have all of the beautiful data scientists in companies like Quantiphi. There is the eagerness sometimes to jump straight into the data, to feel like we are doing something, because thinking about the problem doesn't feel like doing something. But as Einstein once said, it's 90% of the time I spend about the problem and 10% about the answer. It's more true than ever now that we actually have more data, because it's so easy to get lost in the data. So what we do throughout the book is talk about a sequence of questions that you want to ask yourself in order to make sure that you are progressing forward and making good decisions. The first question is, what is it that you wish you knew? That's why we call it I wish I knew. How do we hone in on what is really the essential question before we're going to jump into it? Another tool we talk about to make sure that we are focusing on the question is working backwards. Ask yourself, what is a decision to be made? And then ask yourself, what do I wish I knew in order to be able to make that decision? And then focus on the data and analysis that helps you make that decision and nothing else. It helps very much focusing the analysis. Then come questions like what surprises you that I talked about before. And finally, questions related to what Asif was talking about, connecting the dots. How do we synthesize? To do that, we need to move from discussions of what's in the data to, so what does it mean, which is the synthesis, and the now what? What are we going to do about it? What is the company going to do about it, which focuses specifically on the decisions.
Asif, as Oded just explained it in the context of what businesses are facing now, how do you see this as applicable for Quantiphi?
I mean, I see this applicable not just for Quantiphi, but almost every other business on the planet here. Let's just take an example. So today we have more data than we have ever had in the past. Yet if we take one of the biggest questions that we're facing in the business community is around the whole global macroeconomic situation. Economists are very, very confused today on, number one, are we in a recession or are we not? Second question, will there be a soft landing or a hard landing, right? And these are all things that, of course, with the level of data that's available today, should be answerable in a fairly definitive way, but it's not. And therefore, we know that data is just not enough. And having the right framework, asking the right questions, and tracing through it exactly in the way Oded described is so important. So businesses, including Quantiphi, today have to shape their strategies and determine their next move on how to thrive in a challenging macroeconomic environment. So the timing of this book couldn't have been any better, because it provides an extremely rigorous framework, a step-by-step method to deal with such important questions and beyond.
What are the right questions someone should ask? And is there a framework that they should follow?
Yeah, I mean, the questions to be asked, the first question to be asked is, do I truly understand the decision that I need to make, and do I truly understand the problem that I'm trying to solve? Make sure that these journeys are purposeful journeys. You know, one of the biggest no-nos that we see in data-driven decision making is that people expect the data to provide both the question and the answer. They are looking into the data to say, oh, we have so much data, there got to be something interesting in it, right? Yes, there's always something interesting in the data. The chances that it will be relevant for the business, if you haven't defined the question, is close to zero. Define the question, spend time with the question, and then there is a good chance that actually you will find some good answers in the data. And in terms of framework, we provide several of these frameworks in the book. One of them, as I mentioned before, is this IWIC framework. Another one related more to synthesis. As you're looking at the pieces of information, build bottom up towards asking yourself, so what? What does it mean and now what? But then as you communicate back, works the opposite. Start with make your bottom line your top line. What is it that you recommend, and then provide the data to support that observation. These are just a couple of examples of a framework from the book, and I really want to thank Quantiphi, Asif and Laurie, for your support for the book, and hearing the way you talk about the book makes it so much rewarding for the hard effort that we put into it.
So that was great context, Oded. Thank you. So Asif, what do you see as some next steps to take?
Sure. So I actually read the manuscript on a very long flight from Boston to Mumbai. And as I was reading it, I was like highlighting so many different things, and a few things jumped out. So number one, what I felt was that, you know, the book has a lot of unifying themes around this whole process of decision making, but it's not just, you know, something that you can read once and then apply it, right? It's more of building blocks of decision making principles, and you can either, you know, individually or collectively apply a few of these building blocks to get to better decisions, higher impact decisions, much quicker, in a much more methodical sort of way. And third, it sort of felt obvious. So kind of, you know, this is how decision making ought to be done. And as we know about like some of the best ideas, they look quite obvious in hindsight. So those were some of the feelings that came to me as I was reading this book. And, you know, I will personally treat it more or less as a reference book, which I can keep going back to every once in a while when I'm faced with some dilemmas, some big questions. And I absolutely loved reading it. So that's what also prompted me to write this testimonial. And I really look forward to the release and handing this book out to as many leaders and their teams as I can, so they can be better prepared to make the right decisions for their lines of business.
Fantastic. And Oded, in the context of all of these decisions and challenges, what are just one or two other questions people should ask themselves?
Yeah, I totally loved what Asif said, because that's exactly how we intended the book to be. We intended the book to be ones that you read once, possibly indeed on a flight. And then, you know, many books go with these frameworks and a very linear process. We really think about it as jazz. We think about it as the type of book where you can refer to it over and over again to pick up the right tools, whether you're missing the tool more on how do I really define the question, how do I frame the problem, or whether I'm missing more of a tool of how do I become a fierce interrogator of data, and how do I put it all together to make sure that it is actually actionable, making sure that refer to it as you go, use it whenever needed for whatever problem, as opposed to just use it once, read it, and think about it as a linear process.
Fantastic. I want to thank you both, Oded and Asif, for this incredibly insightful session. We appreciate all the wisdom you both shared with us today.
Thank you very much, Laurie. Really enjoyed the conversation.
Thank you both, and thank you, Quantiphi, for bringing the book into the family.